You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. It is a teaching tutorial Thursday, which means class is in session with Professor Greg Cosell, the venerable one from NFL Films University. My favorite day of the week. Most of you, it's your favorite day of the week. You know what you should do? Everybody should tell a friend, if you do nothing else, listen to Greg Cosell on Thursday's Ross Tucker Football Podcast. He is fantastic. We've got the AFC South today. We're doing our preview series. AFC East next week. Then after that, we'll start to get into the NFC. I love these divisional previews, team by team. Great listen or great watch, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, for you guys to go back and consume over the next couple months, because not a lot will change before the preseason games. I do have some winners this week. People that have spread the word via social media at Ross Tucker NFL, at Ross Tucker Pod, or have taken advantage of any of our sponsors like DraftKings using the code Ross, or Good Ranchers, Labatt Blue Light, or the YouTube shout out, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. I'll get to the winners later. I don't like to make Greg wait. I like to get to the big show.
The Big Show.
Okay, so Greg, before we get into the AFC South,
Yeah.
because there's actually some AFC South news this week as it relates to Nico Collins getting that contract. But speaking of wide receivers getting contracts, it really does feel like this happens every week where some receiver gets a contract. This week it was two of them, and it kind of went under the radar a little bit. I don't know. I kind of like this guy, Jauan Jennings, Greg. Every time I watch, it feels like he makes big plays in big games. And as a blocker, former O-linemen love receivers that actually get after people.
Yeah.
And that's what Jennings does. Obviously, the Niners value him. What have you noticed the last couple of years from Jauan Jennings, who looks like he'll be in the fold there in San Francisco? And now they got Pearsall and Jennings. You know, there's a chance at some point, Greg, they move on from either Ayuk or Deebo Samuel, which would make Jennings even more of a critical component to what they got going.
Well, it's funny. I watched Jennings when he came out of Tennessee, and he played in the SEC, and he was as physical and as competitive a wideout as I recall seeing. Not fast, and that's what hurt him in terms of being drafted, because he's probably in the 4.7 range, which you know is just death for a wide receiver when it comes to draft status. Although it did work out okay for Anquan Bolden running a 4.7 too. But Jennings is so tough, so competitive, and he fits the perfect role. Because think about the Niners offense. See, this is where team and scheme becomes so critical. He's probably not for everybody. But what do the Niners do in their pass game? Where do they work? They work between the numbers. Big, physical, competitive, great hands. What do they do in the run game? They ask their receivers to block. More than willing to block, super competitive, and a really good blocker. So he fits exactly who the Niners are, and that's why they signed him. I mean, you're again, a classic case of you're not going to find that guy. There's not 100 guys like that, even though he's not, a high-level athletic talent. But he fits exactly what the Niners are.
So I got to ask this, Greg, because it made me, you just saying that made me think of it. Ricky Pearsall, who they took in the first round, stylistically, is he more of a Brandon Ayuk type, a Deebo Samuel type? In other words, we know what Jauan Jennings is, right? I guess I'm curious if Pearsall would be a better fit for the Deebo Samuel role or the Brandon Ayuk role.
I would think, and I liked Pearsall coming out, I would think he's more in line of an Ayuk type. He's bigger than you think. I think when a lot of people look at him, they probably think, slot receiver, 5'11", 5'6 feet. He's 6'1 plus, and he's got good speed. He's separated well. I like Pearsall's tape a lot coming out of Florida. I think he's a guy that works the middle of the field. I think that's something that's really important to the Niners, because that's where their pass game works percentage-wise. It works between the numbers. And Pearsall makes tough catches inside. And like I said, he's got good size. I think Pearsall fits, again, how the Niners see their offense.
All right, so let's stay with receivers getting contracts, but we'll dive into today's series, which is the AFC South. And we'll start with the Houston Texans, who just signed Nico Collins to a big contract. Although I think I saw where, I can't remember if he's now the 4th highest paid receiver or the 7th highest paid receiver. I don't know, Greg, that seems pretty good to me from a Texan standpoint based on what he did last year. There's a lot of metrics out there that showed he was like a top 5 receiver in the league. I kind of feel like he came out of nowhere. I mean, he didn't really do much his first 2 years, Greg.
No, and of course, they obviously offensively, those first 2 years, they were not great. They had a quarterback situation that was a little bit in flux. Davis Mills was playing. So Collins, I think, had 37, 38 catches each of his first 2 years, had 80 last year. He's kind of their boundary X receiver, although Bobby Slowick is their OC, so there's a lot of reduced splits. There's a lot of 2x2, that's tight splits. There's a lot of tight bunch. But the thing that really stood out when you watch Nico Collins is how many in-breaking routes he runs. That's his game. He works inside at all levels. Now, he can get vertical too, and they certainly did as the year progressed, counter tendency, and have him with some out-breaking routes where it was clear the defense were playing in-breakers, and he broke outside. But for the most part, he worked inside, and he's got a big body. He's 6'4" and an eighth, and he ran a 4.45. And for 6'4" and an eighth, 215 to run a 4.45, that is really, really good. And he's at his best on movement routes. That's why those in-breakers are so important. Whether you want to go with slants, shallow crosses, glance routes, digs, you want to get him the ball on the move because that's his game. But he is a big man. He's got stride length and really good play speed.
What do you think Bobby Slowick and C.J. Stroud do here in year 2, Greg? What's the evolution here for those two guys?
Well, that's a great question. Obviously Stroud now being in the system for a year, you'll start to see some expansion of concepts. I would bet you'll start to see more motion. They use some because obviously Slowick coming from the Niners. I think you'll start to see more. So I think you'll start to see more formation variation. Diggs now is there, Stephon Diggs. He can line up anywhere in the formation, and he's a smart receiver. So I think you'll see him. He might be the movement receiver. He and Dell, I think, are really good movement receivers within the context of this offense. The question will be the run game. They signed Joe Mixon. They still have Dameon Pierce. I'm curious to see what Mixon can do. They do want to run the ball. I mean, last year, Singletary was there, who's not there anymore. But, down the stretch, Singletary became kind of a feature-type back in terms of volume. I think because of the background of Slowick, they would like to run the ball.
Right, and now it'll be Mixon. They still have Dameon Pierce. I kept thinking that they're going to trade him. Didn't seem like a good fit for the zone running scheme last year.
Yeah, I think that was a surprise to a lot of people. He did not end up playing well, and Singletary became the foundation back.
Defensively, anything jump out to you, Greg?
I thought they made 2 really, really good signings. Really good signings. I thought that we know about Danielle Hunter, just a really good player, close to 100 sacks in his NFL career. But I think an overlooked signing and a really good football player is Danico Autry. Danico Autry has played end and tackle in this league, and he is really good. Very often he plays, for them, he's going to be purely a tackle. But for other teams, he would play end in a base and then move inside in your sub fronts. And he's a very good inside pass rusher. But obviously they have Hunter and Anderson on the outside. Hunter's essentially replacing Grenard, who I think signed with Minnesota, so they just ended up replacing. And I think Christian Harris is right on the verge of being one of the really impactful stack backers in this league.
Let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts, another really interesting team. They got the contract done with Pittman. They drafted A.D. Mitchell. We've talked about him. They have their whole O-line back. I mean, I guess it's too simplistic, Greg, but is it too simplistic to say it's really just about Anthony Richardson because it felt like he really needed reps last year. And unfortunately,
Yeah.
the injury, he didn't get them.
No, and they started the season doing absolutely the right thing with him. They kept it pretty simple. So, in other words, I'll give you examples. If they were in a 3-by-1 set, he would work to trips. He didn't really look backside because that's higher level quarterbacking. He would work to trips in a 3-by-1 set. And if it wasn't there, he'd move. In 2-by-2 sets, very often they ran what we call mirrored route concepts. So it was the same 2-man route concept on each side with a sit route right in front of him in the middle with that fifth receiver, so to speak, just so if, hey, he didn't see it, he had someone right in front of him. So they were starting to slowly expand their concepts, and then he got hurt. So we just don't know where he stands now. We know they have a run game. Jonathan Taylor is still there. They drafted A.D. Mitchell in the second round. I'm sure there were other issues with A.D. Mitchell because talent-wise he was better than a second-round pick based on his tape. And they do have very good skill position players. The big question for them is left tackle. Since Costanzo left, they've really struggled to kind of find a guy. Bernard Raymond has not really panned out. They drafted a kid from Pitt. I don't know if you ever got to see him, Concalves, who I know a lot of coaches I talked to really like this kid. He got hurt this past year and only played 4 games at Pitt, but a lot of people believe he can end up being a quality left tackle. But they need that position to be solidified.
Did not get a chance to watch him. I was spending too much time drinking Labatt Blue Lights with my friends and family and living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Greg, let's discuss their defense. Last year, they got pretty good production from Samson Ebicom. They got a new deal done with Buckner. New deal done, I believe, with Zaire Franklin. Where are you at with the Colts defensively?
Well, I think the big question for them is corner play. Last year, they ended up, through the last part of the season, playing 2 rookies. Juju Brents from Kansas State, who's a big kid, arm length, should be a good player, but they also play Jalen Jones. We'll see who starts opposite Brents. It could be Dallas Flowers. Corner is the position that is a concern for them as we head into the season. The one player who made Leonard expendable last year, and I thought had a really good season, was E.J. Speed, a really good linebacker, really good player for them a year ago. And you mentioned Franklin, who always gets a ton of tackles. A big question, the way Gus Bradley wants to play, and he's been doing this a long time, is can they get pass rush? From the edge in particular, Kwity Paye has not quite become that guy. It's the reason they drafted Latu, the first defensive player off the board. 14 offensive picks, no defensive player until pick 15. It was Latu. And I thought Latu was the best pass rush prospect in this draft class. And I know they felt the same way clearly because that's who they drafted.
Right. Well, and I've seen video where, Chris Ballard says we just got the best rusher in the draft. And they got him at 15, which almost never, ever happens. Curious to see if he would have gone higher if it weren't for, the concerns about the neck injury. Let's get to the Jacksonville Jaguars, Greg. Disappointing season last year, disappointing finish. They've revamped things a little bit. They got Morris at center. They have 2 new receivers, Gabe Davis from Buffalo and Brian Thomas from LSU. I had Sean King, former NFL quarterback, come on. He feels like there's a pretty good chance Brian Thomas becomes the best receiver from this draft class, which really, not many people are saying that. What do you think about the Jags?
Yeah, a lot of people like Thomas. I think he's an ascending player. We'll see how quickly he can become the guy because I think that's what they want. A couple of weeks ago, I did kind of a deep dive into Trevor Lawrence, and he struggled a bit last year, and I think we have to sort of decrease the expectations for what Lawrence is. Lawrence won the national championship as a freshman, and then he got the moniker a generational quarterback. And again, everything I say, as you know, is based on studying film. He's not really at that level talent-wise. He has a good arm, but he's not a power arm guy. His deep balls at times lose energy on the back end. When he has to move in the pocket and reset his platform, his arm strength kind of declines. There are times he can drive the ball with velocity, but for the most part, he's really kind of more of a touch and pace thrower. And I think he showed a tendency last year, and again, he has to work through this to play a little fast from the pocket when he perceived and felt pressure. He just sped up his process, and he's got to get better at that. I just don't know if overall talent he's at the level of the top guys. I think he's a guy that needs a pretty complete offense, a multi-dimensional scheme, and a good defense. I think he's at the top tier of kind of the for want of a better word, system quarterbacks.
That's interesting, Greg, because obviously going back to high school, he was like the highest ranked guy coming out, all those things. But I guess you're right. I don't
Spencer Rattler. It doesn't always work that way.
No, and like he's not Josh Allen.
No.
You know what I mean? Like he's not Josh Allen. So, which is interesting, right? Because one guy was number 1 overall pick and highly touted. The other guy had no scholarship offers.
Right.
And went to Wyoming. I mean, it's just unbelievable that that's how it works out. What about the Jags defensively, Greg?
Yeah, now they got rid of their entire defensive coaching staff, and they're starting over with Ryan Nielsen, who was the Falcons' D coordinator last year. And I thought, with not a lot of talent, that he did an awesome job. And he plays a lot of man coverage. Of course, he had A.J. Terrell, who's one of the better man coverage corners in this league. Now he's got Tyson Campbell. We'll see, opposite him, they signed Darby, who's been in the league a long time, played with the Eagles a bit as well. So we'll see how much man he chooses to play. I think that's what he'd like to do. But their front six, and let's talk front six as opposed to front seven, simply because more teams end up playing front six than front seven. I think it's really talented, really talented. They signed Eric Armstead. We know about Josh Allen. Trayvon Walker, they're still waiting for him to be a more impactful player, but he's a solid player. And I think they're waiting for Devin Lloyd, because Devin Lloyd, he's a guy that, and maybe it won't work, it won't happen, because he just doesn't see it the way he needs to, but he's really athletically gifted. And Aluakun, college safety, I believe at Yale, has transitioned to be a linebacker in this league and is a really good player. Makes a lot of tackles.
They need more from Trayvon Walker and Devin Lloyd. They just do.
Without question.
They took both those guys in the first round. It's year 3 for them. It's kind of time that or get off the pot.
I would agree.
For those. I mean, they could have had Aiden Hutchinson, and said they'd take Trayvon Walker. There's a lesson there. Let's get to the Titans, Greg. Last but not least, boy, it certainly feels like with drafting Latham, signing Ridley, trading for Ridley, or signing Tyler Boyd, it certainly feels like they're trying to find out what they have in Levis this year.
Oh, for sure. And they're working with him hard on his mechanics, which needed some work. He's got a big arm. He's an intelligent kid. But, you look at their skill players. I'm not going to start making lists here, Ross. I don't do that. But, you have their top 3 receivers, Hopkins, Ridley, Boyd. They've got Pollard and Tajay Spears in the backfield. Okay, this kid, Okonkwo, the tight end, is really gifted as an athlete coming out of Maryland. Obviously, their previous offense did not allow these players, certainly Okonkwo, to really develop into, a volume-type player. But, if Latham can play left tackle, and coaches I talk to believe he can, Skoronski will be a better player this year. Cushenberry, one offensive line coach I spoke to, said that was one of the best under-the-radar signings of any team, because he's one of those guys just in terms of the way he controls the O-line room. I mean, you know about this. You've been in O-line rooms. I mean, you know what it's like when you have that guy, and he's that guy. The big question for them will be the right side of their O-line. But this offense, if Levis can develop, and no one's suggesting he's all of a sudden going to throw 40 touchdowns, but if he can develop and work toward that, this offense has some weapons now.
Yeah, and it felt like there were years where they were kind of lacking there. It's interesting, too, because you didn't even mention Treylon Burks, and I don't know. They're hyping him up at OTAs again, but I feel like that happens every year. They're not going to get rid of
him because, obviously Hopkins is older, Boyd's older. They're not going to get rid of Burks, and he's a very talented kid. So we'll see how that plays out.
What about them on defense this year,
new
Greg?
Coordinator, Denard Wilson, who's been with a number of teams, number of different systems, was with the Eagles, as you well know. I'm sure you got a chance to talk to him when he was with the Eagles. Last year he was in Baltimore, so he's seen a lot of different systems. Obviously they've retooled a bit here as well. The big thing for them was signing the two corners. Awuzie and Snead, who they traded for, I guess, and then signed to a big deal. Because, the feeling in the league from a lot of coaches now is corner play has superseded edge pass rushing because of the quick game dimension that the league has evolved into, that you need physical press corners, and Snead is an animal. I mean, there's shots of Snead from the previous years. And last year he played solely on the outside because the Chiefs brought McDuffie inside in their sub, whereas in the past he moved inside to slot Snead, that was. But last year he played solely on the outside, and there's shots of him just mauling receivers. So they have him. They have Awuzie, a big physical corner. I think they addressed that position intentionally because that's the way the league is going.
We address every team, every division, every week with you intentionally, Greg. Check him out on social media so you always know what he's up to, at Greg Cosell. Fantastic as always. Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Ross. Appreciate it.
I'm telling you, Greg is like the father or the grandfather of NFL film study. You know who else is the father? Your father. So I got 3 quick steps for you to knock this Father's Day out of the park. Number 1, go to goodranchers.com. Buy their brand new King Cut box for a dad, and subscribe to any of their custom curated boxes filled with 100% American beef, chicken, pork, or wild-caught seafood for yourself, so you know what you're getting. Use my code ROSS at checkout to claim your free Applewood smoked bacon for life and get free shipping on all your orders, and make this Father's Day one to remember. Absolutely love that they support the paralyzed veterans of America. I mean, what is better than that? Support the paralyzed veterans. Get your dad the best Father's Day gift ever. Use the code ROSS. Support the show. GoodRanchers.com. American meat delivered.
Tux Takes.
All right, Ross, the 49ers, they signed Jauan Jennings to a 2-year, $15.4 million deal that includes $10.5 million guaranteed.
Right, so obviously Greg and I kind of talked about Jauan Jennings. I love when receivers that get down and dirty, when receivers that aren't afraid to block, I love when they get rewarded. I will say now, they do kind of have 4 receivers now that they obviously very much like. They're paying Jauan Jennings as more than a number 4 receiver. And they didn't draft Pearsall to be a number 4 receiver. So it's something this Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel thing is very interesting to watch over the next few months. Would not be surprised. I said this during the draft. Would not be surprised if one of those guys gets moved at some point.
We've got a few other roster moves. The Vikings, they re-signed offensive lineman Dalton Risner. The Jets, they signed running back kick returner Tariq Cohen. And the Chargers, they signed former first-round pick Alex Leatherwood.
Did you know that it was Risner, or did you have to look it up?
I remember last time you corrected me for saying Risner instead of Risner.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
That's funny. Tariq Cohen, I saw where the Jets said there's going to be more than 100 kick returns. And so they wanted to make sure they had a good one, and Tariq Cohen was really good before he was out of the league the last few years. And Leatherwood, such a classic example of if a guy is a first-round pick, they just get so many opportunities. Hasn't worked out for him with the Raiders or the Bears, but he was a first-round pick, so he's going to get more chances. Although, what am I saying? I played for 5 teams. I got a bunch of chances, so maybe I shouldn't talk. But at least I felt like I played pretty well when I got my opportunity. I kept getting chances. Speaking of opportunities, you guys have an opportunity every week to be a winner. Frankly, you're a winner just by listening or watching the show, but I also like to send you stuff. And by the way, I owe a bunch of you guys, probably 5 to 7 people, signed autographs. I haven't gotten to it in the last few weeks. I will get to it. The Spread the Word winner this week via social media is Brian Doherty. Brian, I saw your comment on Instagram at Ross Tucker Pod. It was that easy. Now you got to email me and let me know your address. I'll send you one of these signed press passes from last year. Our sponsor confirmation email winner is actually Mark Walsh, who rated and reviewed the show, which I loved. And the YouTube shout out, Nathan Burnett. He gets a video if he wants it. We're shouting out anybody. What a great week. Go check out the other shows if you missed them. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com, the best Father's Day gift I've ever heard of. Myfrontpagestory.com, and I guarantee to send you a signed autograph in the mail if you get one of these for dad or grandpa or whoever, father figure. Backofficescheduler.com, steakhousesports.com, humanheadnyc.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.